Excellency, Right Reverend Dr. George Nerlangat, Bishop of Mantia, Reverend Father Joseph Ratapilli CMI, Provincial St. Paul Province, Mysore, Reverend Father Gilson George, Director, Siddhivihara, our dear Jubilarians, Father Thomas Kunyandodat, who is also my teacher, and Father Joseph Angadiyat, our dear graduates, distinguished guests, fathers, sisters, and my dear friends. At the very outset, may I congratulate all the graduates, all the 33 graduates of Siddhivihara for their accomplishment and wish them all the best in their life to come, wherever you are. Can you join me to give a big round of applause to our graduates, please? Your Excellency, with your blessings, may I share some of my thoughts on the Evangelical Council of Poverty. Perhaps a topic which has become very controversial in the life of the religious today. Perhaps a topic which has been debated and redebated about its relevance and meaning today. The very idea of rethinking poverty, that's the title I want to give for today's lecture. Rethinking poverty occurred to me when I was confronted with an embarrassing situation in my own community at Dharmarang College. Two of my best students left the CMI congregation on similar grounds. One a few years ago and the other recently. I can vividly recapture the scene. One day, early morning about 5:30, one of the brothers, Brother Benny, came to my room and told me, "Father, I am here to say goodbye. I am leaving Dharmarang College for good." And asked him, "What's the matter? Come on, let's talk." And he said, "No, Father, I have made up my mind, for I don't find any meaning in the vow of poverty amidst the comforts, if not luxuries, of this college. I think it is absurd to talk about poverty today." I tried to pacify Benny, but of no avail. And the very same day, Benny left Dharmarang College. Now he has joined an NGO and working for the street boys at Kochi. It is absurd to talk about poverty today. I would say it is not only Benny's thought, it might be the thought of every and each religious today. And that rethinking of poverty took me to the Gospels. I went through the Gospels and I saw two progressive texts. The first one, Luke 6:20, we read, "Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who are poor." Can you remember that? Yes? Come on, can you remember that? Yes. The second text is from Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, 5:3. Anybody remembers what is it? "Blessed are you who are in spirit." You see, Luke, "Blessed are you who are poor." It seems Luke suggests that who are literally poor are blessed. On the other hand, Matthew, addressing a rich, traditional Jewish community, changed and said, "Blessed are those who are Blessed are the poor in spirit. That took me to the Vatican II Perfecte Caritatis, Article 30, to find out the difference of these two texts. In Article 13, Perfecte Caritatis captures both these aspects of the Gospels. Poverty both in fact and in spirit. Poverty both in fact and in spirit. But with an addition, try to give new expressions of poverty if need be. Therefore, my dear fathers, brothers and sisters, and your excellency, the challenge of the day is to identify with the poor after the model of Jesus Christ. Identify with the poor. Therefore, let me ask the question, are we the religious poor? Are we? I know the silence, because we are not sure about the answer. That's why Benny said it is absurd to talk about poverty today. Are we poor? And that question led me to a research to find out what are the different kinds of poor in this world. And I could give a long list of the poor. The first I want to highlight is the indigent poor. Who are the indigent poor? People who are deprived of their basic necessities of life: food, clothing and shelter. Roti, kapada, makan. I remember that was the title of a Hindi movie years ago. I don't know, some of you have seen. Have you? Yes. That film, Kapada, Roti, Kapada, Makan, depicts the struggle of the people for their daily sustenance. Now, the latest census in India showed that about 62.5 million families live below poverty line, BPL. 62.5 million families in India. And 47% of the children are malnutrition, suffering from malnutrition. This is the picture of the people who are indigent. Are we indigently poor? Are we?
No.
Recently there was a study, and that study brought out that the greatest and biggest corporate in the world is the Catholic Church. No exaggeration. We don't know the strength and might of Catholic Church. It is said the elephant does not know what is the strength of the elephant. And Hosanna brought out a funny study about the CMIs. I don't know whether our provincial remembers that. He said, if the CMI's assets are divided among the members, we are about 3,500 plus. Every member will get 3 crores rupees today. But then maybe CMIs, don't forget, we have no claim. That's in statistics. We have no claim. Therefore the question is, are we poor? Are we indigent poor? I think the answer is no. Not only that, I believe even if the entire Indian nation goes on famine, the religious can survive at least another 10 years more. Am I stretching too much? If not 10 years, surely 5 years. Therefore, it is sure we are not indigent poor. Now second, oppressed poor. Who are the oppressed poor? The victims of human injustice and social discrimination? Are we among the oppressed poor? Are we the victims of social discrimination? I'm not quite sure. At least sociologists would say there are 4 power centers in this world. 4 power centers. And what are they? Number 1, money. And in Hindi there is a saying, "Paisa ke upar khuda bhi nahi ud sakti." Over money, even God cannot fly, because that's a strong power center. Secondly, state. Thirdly, word, thinkers, media. And 4th one, any guess? What is the 4th one? Are you listening to me?
Yes.
God power. Especially in a country like India, God men control the world, and they did happen things as they wish. That's why whenever we go to an office, we are in uniform. Why? Things can get done. You see, very often among these 4 power centers, there is a nexus. Money clubbed with or coupled with state, word, and God. Therefore, I would say we are not the oppressed, rather we are the oppressors. These 4 power centers form maximum 5 to 7% of the society, and they control almost, let's say, 85-90% of the population. Therefore, my second conclusion, we are not the oppressed poor. Now a third, humble poor. Who are the humble poor? Who acknowledge their helplessness and trust in God and God alone. Do you get me? Humble poor are those who acknowledge their helplessness and trust in God and God alone. Are we the humble poor? Whom do we trust? God or Mammon? Let's go to our societies, our communities. Who is normally appointed as a provincial, a superior? One who has done something in temple affairs. New institution, new school, new college. You see? Therefore, often we talk about our strength in terms of numbers of the congregation. Among the religious, there is a big fight going on who is the greatest in India. Is it Jesuit or Salesians and CMIs who would say we are not lagging behind? Therefore, he is the greatest. And whenever they get together, they ask the question, how many institutions do you have, schools, colleges, universities? Oh, we have 200, oh, we have 201. Now, who is greatest? I have heard sometime a provincial saying, in our province there is a policy. What is that? For 3 years, they will select a provincial who is spiritually sound. And he will take care of the spiritual matters for 3 years. Then next time, they will elect somebody who is very good at administration, bringing money. And he will take care of the temporal matters, balancing act. You see, therefore the point I'm saying is that our trust is definitely not in God, but in our land, property, FDs, mutual funds, etc., etc., etc. That means we are not humble. My dear fathers and brothers and sisters, we are not indigent poor, we are not oppressed poor, we are not humble poor, yet we call ourselves the poor. What kind of poor are we? So I thought we should have another term, and that is the religious poor. Now, who is the religious poor? Religious poor are those who voluntarily, each word is very important, voluntarily take the virtue of poverty. Religious poor are those who voluntarily take the virtue of poverty. You see, we are religious not because we have nothing to eat. I don't think anybody is in a family where there is famine, utter poverty, utter helplessness. I don't think any congregation would select any candidate from such a family. I think in that way we are very aggressive and arrogant. But therefore, who is a religious poor? Who voluntarily take the virtue of poverty. Now, first word, voluntarily. We know the meaning. Voluntarily means it's not forced by outsiders, but because of inner compulsion, inner voice of the Spirit. Therefore we can say it is the Spirit of God, it's a gift. Therefore the vow of poverty is a gift of God. But it's not enough simply a gift. The second part is very important. It's a personal decision. It's a personal decision. Personal decision would mean by my knowledge and freedom. That's the meaning of voluntary. It's a gift of God on the one hand. On the other hand, I am saying fiat, yes, to the gift of God. Now the second word in that definition is virtue. Perhaps you might have studied about virtues and vices. What is a virtue? I think among the philosophers it is Plato who for the first time introduced the concept of virtue. In Greek, virtue means arete. What does it mean? Excellence. Virtue is something extraordinary, something different. Now, for Plato, any virtue for that matter, we know there are natural virtues, human perfections, there are also theological virtues. Natural virtues like wisdom, justice, but theological virtue, the three according to Catholic Church: faith, hope, and charity or love. Now Plato would say a virtue to be a virtue, it should have a tinge of happiness. Do you get that very important point? A virtue to be a virtue should involve some sort of happiness. Plato gives a beautiful example. Suppose we all like ice cream. Am I right? If it is best ice cream like asata or butterscotch, very good. Now, suppose you go on eating ice cream and if you don't have any happiness out of that, why do you eat? Why do you eat ice cream when you don't enjoy? You go on eating ice cream and you are weeping, oh my good heavens, as if it's a burden. Take some of the pious devotions we undertake. Visit the Blessed Sacrament. You go on visiting the Blessed Sacrament and then you find it a burden. You don't enjoy that. Then why do you do that? Are you getting me? Yes. You plan to help others, but you help with a curse. Damn it, this man. Why do you do that? Therefore Plato said virtue to be a virtue must involve a little bit of happiness. That's also true with the vow of poverty. When you voluntarily take up the vow of poverty, that should give us some joy. Joy to be in our community of the poor. Now third and the most important, poverty, to be poor. What does it mean? Let me introduce a French word, disponibilité. In English, disponibility. Disponibility has two meanings, a negative meaning and a positive meaning. Disponibility means, negatively, a state of being unattached. A state of being unattached. In other words, some kind of detachment. That is what Buddhism talk about at the end of their meditation, nirvana, a state of perfect detachment. And that's exactly disponibility is all about. Now the positive aspect of disponibility is availability. Availability. According to the philosopher Marcel, Gabriel Marcel, maybe some of you might have heard about, at least there are some philosophers sitting there, my own students, I'm happy to see you here. They might remember, Marcel said disponibility means total availability. Total availability of a person to the other. And we can find the best example in the person of Jesus Christ. Matthew chapter 26:26. While they were at table, he took bread, blessed, broke, and gave, and said, take and eat. Similarly, he took that chalice, blessed, gave, and said, take and drink. Perfect example of availability. Jesus did not spare anything for him, but as St. Paul puts it, he became a ransom for many. He gave up completely, and therefore he could say at the end, everything is accomplished. My dear fathers and brothers, this is exactly the our point. Total availability. Now, this total availability is not purely a mindset. It's not a concept. It's not a thought. This availability must reach out into action. St. James says faith without action is dead. Similarly, our poverty without action would be dead. Now, what are the different streams where we can reach out? Number one, availability should provide the indigent poor. Do you remember the three kinds of poor? Indigent, oppressed, and humble. Now, what are our availability enables us, facilitate us? Number one, availability should provide the indigent poor with the necessities of life. Number one, Jesus correctly said, Luke 9, give something to eat. You see that famous miracle, multiplication of loaves? Their disciples were told by Jesus, give them something to eat. Our availability should reach out the people who don't have the basic necessities of life, roti, kapda, makan. Therefore, the ethics of John the Baptist, anybody, those who have two cords, let him, let her share one with those who have nothing, so too with food. That is the first availability in action. Secondly, availability should defend the cause of the oppressed poor. The oppressed poor who are the victims, so that they should become the victors. The very famous agenda of Jesus, Luke 4:18. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to proclaim the good news. You see, especially freedom to the captives. That's exactly the availability should enable us to fight for the cause of the oppressed poor. Now, thirdly, availability should cultivate the attitude of the humble poor. Again, Luke 13. Why do you worry about food and drink? Why do you worry about what to wear? First, seek God's righteousness. Everything will be given to you. Yes, therefore, availability should cultivate in us that attitude of the humble poor who can trust in God and God alone, nothing else. Therefore, total availability, number one, provide the indigent poor with the necessities of life. Defend the cause of the oppressed poor, and cultivate the attitude of the humble poor. Perhaps some of you who are engaged in social action, social work, charitable works might argue, we have been doing that. Yes, every province, I think as far as my knowledge has, there is a counselor for social work. I don't know with all other congregations. You see, yes. And what are they doing? Social work. Is social work providing food for the indigent poor, defending the cause of the oppressed poor, cultivating the attitude of the humble poor? I don't know. Okay. When you feel bored, just put up and many livestock. Okay. Now, there is one philosopher, at least, a French philosopher, Voltaire, who criticized our Christian social work. According to Voltaire, social work is nothing but two defense mechanisms. Number one, boosting one's own failing ego. Number two, soothing our pricking conscience. Let me take the first one. Boosting our failing ego. Tell me, because of our social work, has anyone become independent and self-reliant? I don't know. Because Aristotle said, giver is always greater than the receiver. And that is true. Therefore, even he conceived that God is only a giver. He doesn't receive. Because according to Aristotle, a perfect man only gives, not receives. Now in our social work, our attitude is like, only give, don't receive, but give in such a way so much so they never stop receiving. Because the moment they become self-reliant, you are no more wanted. Then what about these social workers? What are they going to do? They will be unemployed. Therefore, they make it sure that the social work is continued perpetually. In other words, there will be receivers all the time. And that is always a boost for us. Oh, who are these people? Yes, they are my dependents. They are my beneficiaries. That is about the first point. Now, second point, to soothe our pricking conscience. Just imagine a scenario of a rich house where there is a domestic animal dog. The master loves the dog, no doubt, but at times dog can be very nuisance. Barks and barks. What does the master do? He gets up, take a piece of crumb and throws to the dog. Dog is happy, barking is over, master is also happy. According to Voltaire, our social work is nothing but this. We are living in the midst of the poor, the downtrodden, the marginalized. Therefore, there is a prick of conscience. There is a inner voice saying, you are doing injustice. And how to get over it? Charitable works. Throw crumbs. Here is one house. Here are 2 scholarships. My dear fathers and brothers, definitely we can challenge what Voltaire has said. I don't think all the thousands of people who are taking up social work as their profession, as part of their religious life, are doing what Voltaire might say. But let us have a checklist. With that I will conclude. What are the checklists? Just number 3. Number 1, whenever we undertake any social work, whatever be, education or uprooting or eradicating poverty or whatever be, the first point should be solidarity with the people. What does it mean, solidarity with the people? Taking people into confidence. When I asked in my class to assume my fathers and also brothers, beginning of Dharmaram, was it in solidarity with the people? Did we consult first what we are going to start? Has it become people's movement? Maybe the answer is no. What will be the consequence? Suppose tomorrow something happens to Dharmara. Do you think how many people will come and help? How many? Perhaps nobody. They will keep a distance and they will laugh within. Oh, it should have happened much earlier, now happened. Why? Solidarity with the people was somehow missing. We can ask to every social work we take up. For example, school. When we start a school, is it for employment and for the maintenance of the people concerned or for the people of the locality? Taking people into confidence means it should be their enterprise, their movement. At least from the Blessed Chavra, we have heard The monastery at Mandanam, that was people's movement. Therefore, Blessed Chavara did not care too much about it. Whenever there was need, people were to help. So first point, checklist, solidarity with the people. Number 2, maximum good of the maximum number of people. What will be our type of activity? The question we ask, does it serve the maximum number of the people and the maximum good? We know today one of the key concepts is common good. Are we contributing to the common good? Or are we only beneficiaries of the privileges of the society? The vow of poverty should enable us to contribute to the society. Not only receive, we have every right and privilege to take it. Equally important is we are supposed to contribute. Now finally, third, the awareness that we are not the owners of this world, rather trustees. We are entrusted with something to take care, and taking care for others, not for us. In other words, anybody who profess the vow of poverty, they are simply managers. They manage for the sake of others. Remember, there is a difference between owners and managers. And the fact is, we are not owners, but just managers. Therefore, Your Excellency, Reverend Fathers, brothers and sisters, let us call into mind the vow of poverty we have professed. Let it be a mindset where disponibility would rule supreme. Secondly, let that disponibility be a movement of action, reaching out to the indigent poor, to the oppressed poor, and to the humble poor, so that we can all march toward the righteousness of God, the kingdom of heaven. Amen. Thank you.